The negotiations of the TTIP are indeed very enigmatic in the respect that they are being held in a complete darkness, shadows of secrecy, as it all is around. And it reminds me of the old proverb that if you can't hear the music, the dancers seem mad. How are the two protagonists presenting or explaining their project? To answer that question, we have invited Her Excellency, the Ambassador Helen Campbell for the EU, and Chargé d'Affaires of the US Embassy, the acting ambassador in Oslo, and we are indeed eager to hear your presentation. Please, will you take the chair?
Well, thank you. Good morning, everybody. And first of all, my warm congratulations to the European movement on picking such a relevant subject for discussion today. I have a PowerPoint presentation, which I hope is miraculously going to appear behind this. It does. Excellent. So I'm very happy once again to see the European Union delegation and the US Embassy together talking about TTIP. It's something we've made a little bit of a habit of in Oslo, and I think there's a very sound reason for it, as you'll hear from Jim de Hart later. I'm going to speak about three things. First of all, the context, and I swear I hadn't met Frederick till 5 minutes before coming into this room here. So, I'm going to talk about the context, then I'm going to talk about why TTIP, and a little bit about where we are now and how things stand. So the world we live in, Frederick said it extremely well. We have this iPhone. This is my iPhone, photographed yesterday in the office. I hope you like the backdrop. US product, designed in California, manufactured in China, with a 12% European Union contribution. So like so many items we take completely for granted today, nothing comes from one country anymore. Things have multiple origins. So our new European Union trade policy needs to adjust to global value change. And I think just about any other electronic item would have the same origin as an iPhone. So Europe, where we are today. Responding to the economic crisis we faced, when President Jean-Claude Juncker took office, and that's just over a year ago now, his first priority was to get Europe back to growth and getting people back to decent jobs. So that is very much, I think, the primary context for the European Union. One of his 10 priorities that he set was to negotiate a reasonable and balanced trade agreement with the United States of America in a spirit of mutual and reciprocal benefits and transparency. And we see the debate now we have on TTIP. Since that, I think President Juncker chose his words for a very clear audience. But we see many similarities in the debate on TTIP in the European Union and here in Norway. And I think the debate we've had on TTIP has had also deep influence on European Union trade policy and provoked enormous public interest, to put it mildly. And it's in this context that the European Union has just come forward with a new trade strategy. Now, an apology. You asked me here to talk about TTIP, and I will do that. But I think it's sufficiently important to outline where we are now with the new trade strategy, which has just been published. This was published on the 14th of October, so very, very recently. And it's based on trade and investment policy being conducted in an ever more responsible way around the three principles mentioned here: effectiveness, transparency, and values. And it recognises very much the need for the European Union to respond to the current debate on trade. People are concerned about the impact of trade on their daily lives. They want reassurances about the preservation of standard of living, as well as that of people in other countries, and of the environment. And people also want to see trade benefiting everyone. The communication is under discussion. We have a few copies outside, but it's easily accessible on the DG Trade website. And member states will give their first views on this in the Council conclusions expected next month in December. So we're at very early days of this. So why the title, Trade for All? I said the focus is on making sure that as many people as possible have access to the benefits of trade. And who are all? All here would include European Union consumers who already have a wide choice of products at lower prices thanks to the open trade policy the European Union has. But the strategy contains actions to increase consumers' confidence in products. Within the European Union, we've pledged to protect levels of consumer, environmental and social protection. Outside the European Union, we'll give greater support to fair and ethical trade schemes and to broader efforts to have responsible management of supply chains. We all saw a few years ago what happened in Bangladesh with the Rana Plaza disaster, and I think this is something which we need to show that we can actually respond to. Also about workers in the European Union, many of the new jobs created through growth will be created outside Europe's borders. So one of the things the strategy will aim to do is to create economic opportunities to keep jobs within the European Union. I think already more than 30 million jobs in the European Union, it's about 1 in 7, depend on exports outside the EU. And the agreements we're working on will also contain strong provisions to promote the respect of labour rights around the world and to make it a priority that our partners have provisions on this. It was interesting to see in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, actually, strong measures taken on issues such as labour rights, and I think that's something we'll see as an emerging trend. Also, this is about citizens within the European Union to help the public engage more with policy making and to make negotiations more transparent. And one of the proposals here is that the Commission will request that the Council publish negotiating mandates and the EU texts so people can see them. This is a practice we're starting to evolve through TTIP. So one of the lessons learned is that will be taken to other negotiations as well. There are also, for the first time, plans to have special provisions so that small and medium-sized enterprises can take more benefits from trade agreements. Also, there's a focus on people in developing countries. As the world's largest importer, already our market is a source of income to people in those countries, but the new strategy aims to confirm a stance which is in favour of development. We'll also give more prominence to human rights and begin an intensified dialogue with countries where we think we can really influence and make sure that we do something to tackle human rights breaches. There will also be measures to support fair and ethical trade and ensure, as I mentioned, responsible management of supply chains to help develop more sustainable trade opportunities for small producers and better conditions for workers in poor countries. Alongside this, the strategy sets out a programme of trade negotiations building on achievements so far. The European Union is already a global trading partner, as this map illustrates, and I think it may surprise many people to see how many countries have the European Union as their first trade partner. I think the assumption now is that this map would be much more red than it is, but it's interesting to see. So the programme of negotiations that the trade strategy sets out focuses on two main aspects, the first multilateral and the second bilateral. I think one thing to be absolutely clear about is that the World Trade Organization is at the core of what the European Union wants to do. The European Union has traditionally supported the World Trade Organization, but it hasn't been moving very quickly in many areas over the last few years. So one of the aims now with the new strategy will be to bring the World Trade Organization back to the center and to take some of the lessons we've learned from our regional and bilateral agreements back into the World Trade Organization context in time. On regional agreements, we welcomed, as I mentioned, the announcement of the Trans-Pacific Partnership as a good means to encourage jobs and growth. But I think it's interesting to see the impact of these agreements if we take them together. First of all, we see TTIP, which would come to about 46% of global GDP, potentially. Then the European Union is negotiating an agreement with Japan. Estimates there would show around 30%. And to add to that, the TPP, I think, with around 38%. So taken together, all of these agreements will have a major impact. We've also got an ambitious agenda bilaterally, and this just gives an overview of where things stand now. The agreements in green are the ones already in place, and the yellow ones coming on. So I think if you look 10 years ago, you'd have seen that free trade agreements in force would have covered less than a quarter of European Union trade. Now it's about 1/3, and if everything here is concluded, you could see around 2/3 of all of trade actually being covered by these agreements. Looking to the future, we aim, of course, to complete TTIP the EU-Japan Free Trade Agreement and the agreement with Canada, which Minister Helgesen mentioned earlier this morning. We're also looking to strengthen our presence in China, conclude the investment negotiations ongoing there, and launching negotiations with Australia and New Zealand. We're looking at our partnership with Africa to have deeper relations through the regional economic partnership agreements there, and also to strengthen with other areas in our neighbourhood and in Latin America. Now, at long last, on to TTIP. The European Union and the US are top trading partners. I think Frederick showed a paper with the negotiating mandate for free trade a long time ago. I think if I were to take the state of our existing relations, it would be a 4-page document or so, Jim, very short. We have actually despite the closeness of our relationship, we have very little on paper at this stage. So TTIP, in that sense, would be a groundbreaking agreement. We have the world's largest trading relationship, about 50% of global GDP and 1/3 of world trade. And a staggering 1.8 billion of goods and services are traded each day. And the 15 million jobs, depending on transatlantic trade, of which I should say we think about 10 million are within the European Union. And on top of this, over 50% of world's foreign direct investment is transatlantic between the US and the EU. And whilst there's much debate on standards and regulations, I think few would deny that actually the US and the EU are the leaders in setting global standards and that we both have high standards. The next 2 slides show the European Union's key trading partners. We see for exports the US in top position. Then we see, I think it's also important on this slide to see where Norway is, not to neglect that relationship at all. Extremely important trading partner. We also see on this one here, China has the main import, but USA second, again on the imports there. So we have an extremely important trading relationship. We do a lot, but I think we all agree we can do more and we can do it better. There's a lot of focus on new trading partners, but if I can take a quote from a US Chief Executive Officer, which was quoted by our ambassador in the US, David O'Sullivan, recently, there's certainly a lot of money to be made in new markets, but this old market is still where the majority of our profits are generated. So I think important to see what we can still continue to do together. We have a lot in common. We're both open, market-oriented economies whose people thrive in competitive environments. I think we also share the view that engagement in the world doesn't mean compromising on labour principles, human rights, or environmental protection. And we both are in places which respect the rule of law and uphold high standards. So what are we negotiating? First of all, free trade agreements in the past were very much focused on tariff reductions. To use a common cliche, others have mentioned it this morning, trade is no longer just about trade. The agreement we have will go into areas which are way beyond this. For example, public procurement, services, investment, intellectual property rights. It makes it a more complex partnership, but in the end means there's a lot more to be gained from it. And I think, for example, if we can find a way forward on regulatory cooperation between the US and the EU, we can in time take that, hopefully, to a broader international context. For the European Union, I'd identify 3 broad objectives for our negotiations, and we think from the recent round that the contours of the package are starting to emerge. The first of these is an ambitious market access package. Secondly, regulatory cooperation, whilst respecting the level of protection and autonomy of either side. And thirdly, to modernise international trade rules in areas such as sustainable development, anti-corruption, and trade-related aspects of energy and raw materials and investment. So a lot to do there. Just to give a couple of examples, we've seen this through the Canada agreement as well, would be the possibility to export more, I shouldn't say this in Norway, but I will, processed agricultural products. So to have better protection for geographical indications from the European Union, hams, cheese, wine, high-value processed products there. Secondly, making regulations more compatible. I was going to use the example of cars, but I'm not going to. We have, for example, medical scanner machines. We make excellent scanner machines in Europe, excellent ones in the US. But manufacturers are faced with having to make 2 different versions for the different markets. So there are tremendous savings to be achieved from that kind of cooperation. Try and find a way forward on that would be very important. So where are we now? The negotiations started in July 2013. The 11th round took place in Miami in October this year, and we're making progress. I'm not going to say much more about that because I think, Jim, you may in your presentation in a minute. But I can't talk about TTIP without mentioning two subjects which have dominated the debate, not just in Norway, but I should say in the European Union too. And Minister Helgesen gave a good short explanation of the investor-state dispute settlement issue in his speech earlier this morning. There's been a lot of debate here, and I think one of the things I would say about what's happening now with TTIP is that the European Union has been listening, and in particular, Commissioner Cecilia Malmström. She says here, to sum it up, we want the rule of law, not the rule of lawyers. And she has taken, if we're going to continue with this, with investment protection and international arbitration, we need to have a very different animal. So I think, she has really listened to the criticism on ISDS and has thus come forward with a new proposal for an investment court. I won't go into the detail on this, but the aim is to ensure that all actors can have full trust in the system. It's built around the same elements as domestic and international courts and will enshrine governments' right to regulate and ensure transparency and accountability. This is just a proposal at this moment. It hasn't been discussed fully with the US, but I think for the audience here, important to say that the Commissioner has taken this proposal forward. It's got a lot of interest and is working to find a solution which is acceptable for the European Union. The next slide. The other issue I think has been of concern everywhere is that of transparency. And to quote Commissioner Malmström again, while revealing our entire negotiating hand to our American partners would be folly, sorry Jim, and hardly in the interests of the European people, I have worked to make these the most open, transparent trade negotiations ever. And we're proposing to make all our trade negotiations transparent through the new strategy with position papers and draft texts online. I think this has been a real challenge. It is difficult to show your cards during a negotiation, but we have got a real will from Brussels to do what we can to make sure that during the negotiation people are informed of the various stages and kept on board. We also have, as the Minister mentioned now, we have, I hope, an equally good dialogue on the US and the EU side to keep you informed of issues of particular interest along the way where we can. Finally, just a quick word on what this means for Norway. There's a very interesting paragraph in the new trade strategy, which has just come out, which I've mentioned before, which says that looking ahead, several countries have expressed an interest in future in joining the TTIP agreement. And we've said at this stage this could be explored, starting with countries which have close relationships with the European Union or the US and are ready to meet the high level of ambition. So there's an opening there. We can't say at this stage what that means, but there's an opening at least to look into this issue, which is something I'm sure we will do for the next over the next period. Finally, just to conclude, I think we can see still in the current environment major benefits to be gained from TTIP in terms of trade and the economy, both for the European Union and for the United States, and to reassure that it's not about lowering standards, and we are doing what we can to ensure that we're listening and trying to ensure more transparency. So, thank you very much for your attention.